All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Thorndike Award winner from 2017, Dr. Robert Slavin. Bob is the director of the Center for Research and Reform in Education at Johns Hopkins University, but perhaps he's best known as the chair of the Success for All Foundation. Bob received his PhD in social relations from Johns Hopkins University, and he had an extraordinary career by any metric. He's authored over 300 articles and book chapters on a wide range of topics, including cooperative learning, comprehensive school reform, ability grouping, school and classroom organization, and evidence-based reform. He's a member of the National Academy of Education, and he's the author of 24 books, including 2 widely adopted textbooks, Educational Psychology, Theory into Practice, and Cooperative Learning, Theory, Research, and Practice. He will add the Thorndike Award to a lengthy list of previous awards, which I can't go into or we'll run out of time, but I wanted to highlight that he has won the AERA Review of Research Award and the Palmer Old Johnson Award for Best Article in an AERA journal twice. He won that one twice. In 1986, faced with failing schools in inner-city neighborhoods in Baltimore, the Baltimore school superintendent asked Bob Slavin for help. And according to Bob, quote, "We came to an agreement that we would try a model based on the idea that every single child was going to be successful no matter what. That model became Success for All, which has been used nationwide in 1,300 schools and has been rated one of the most effective reform programs, according to meta-analytic work of school improvement." According to the current chair of the Thorndike Award Committee, Dr. Clark Chin, quote, "The body of research that he launched on cooperative learning and methods for improving cooperative learning is a landmark body of research for all who are interested in classroom learning." It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Slavin.
Well, geez, that's a lot to live up to. My intention today is perhaps to go a little beyond what people ordinarily do in these kinds of situations. What I hope to do is to engage you, perhaps terrify you, with a discussion about what's going on, from my perspective, with the role of evidence in education, the role of evidence in practice, which is undergoing a substantial change as we speak, and I think will have a tremendous impact in coming years on the practice of education, on policies in education, and in research in education. So as time goes on, my hope is that you'll look back to this very day and say, dang, he said this was going to happen, and look at it, it really did. Or, what an idiot. Of course that wasn't going to happen. Anyway, so let me give you, kind of go back to basics. What am I talking about here? School reform is going on all the time. We have loads of change. So education is constantly churning. For example, we have different approaches to accountability and assessment all the time. Governance, so there are people who are in favor of charters, there are people who are opposed to charters. There are school districts that are becoming more centralized. There are school districts becoming less centralized with more site-based management. There's lots of arguments in recent years about trying to use teacher evaluations in different ways to terrify teachers into doing a better job, and many other things. So we live in our profession in a time of constant change, and what is interesting in this constant change is how little the role has been for evidence. We make all these changes. There's loads of shouting and different positions that people take in the media. And oftentimes we never even find out what happened, what really went on, and whether it ever benefited children, and go on to the opposite of whatever it was. So what we have is a pendulum. So we have change all the time, but it usually operates in a pendulum where some idea comes in, it becomes very, very popular, it becomes universal in some cases. Everybody is talking about it, and it's the new thing, and now you have to do this. And you can set your clock and know that within 3, 4, 5 years, people are going to be talking about just the opposite. Well, we tried that, didn't work, so now we're going to do the opposite, without even recognizing that the opposite was what they did before they did the innovation that they just dropped. And that didn't work either. And so we go back and forth in a pendulum kind of a fashion on all sorts of things. Now, there are two parts of our society and economy that engage in a lot of change. One part you can call the fashion part. Hemlines go up and down, ties get wider and narrower, all kinds of things happen in fashion and architecture. In where I grew up, just outside of Washington, D.C., there's a city called Silver Spring, which was loaded with Art Deco buildings. When I was a kid, we thought Art Deco was so ugly because that was old. The buildings that used Art Deco, of course, were old, dusty, not the high rent district. And they were tearing down a lot of these Art Deco buildings. Now, if you are aware of such things, Art Deco is back. It's the greatest thing ever. People are finding old Art Deco buildings and improving them because it's in. Now, Art Deco didn't change. What changed is people's tastes. Things come in and they go out based on taste, and they can't remain too long because eventually people get tired of something and they move on to something else. In education, this is more or less the way change happens. Education does not change on the basis of evidence. It changes on the basis of word of mouth, people talking to each other about what they did and what they think you should do. It changes based on tradition. We've always done things this way, or what have you. Changes on politics. Well, the state superintendent said we have to do this, and they said that because their political friends said that that's what we have to do. And marketing, a sales rep shows up and says, here's the greatest new thing, and schools do that. Evidence traditionally has played almost no role in any of this. Instead, the actual change of real things that matter to kids is so often everything but evidence. So here's an illustration, if you will. I lived for a period of time working part-time at the University of York in England, and York has a famous racetrack, horse racetrack, and on race days, all the fancy ladies come parading down the main street of York, Micklegate, wearing these gorgeous dresses and what are called fascinators. I've never seen a fascinator in America. Maybe they do. They have them here. I probably do. Fascinators are these wild hair things, and the wilder the better. And each year you could see a progression of different fascinators. Why? Because last year's fascinator isn't fascinating this year, because that was last year's fascinator, and you have to have something. The whole idea of it is to have something that is not the same as the one you used last year, but is fancier or different or weirder or whatever than the one last year. In education, I remember there was several years ago, you all may remember this, somebody got the idea that children would benefit from bathtubs. Remember this? People were bringing old bathtubs into classrooms, and then they would put comfy pillows in the bathtub, and the kids would be encouraged to go read in the bathtub. Or else people were building lofts, and kids could climb up into the loft and read books. And I don't know, there's nothing wrong with bathtubs and lofts, but the concept was that this was going to change everything, because now the kids were going to love reading more and God knows what. But there was a period of time when you couldn't go into a classroom anywhere for first, second, third grade classroom without seeing bathtubs and lofts. And then all of a sudden, all the bathtubs and lofts were gone. I don't know why. Nobody knows why. Nobody measured the impact of bathtubs and lofts. It was just something that was cool, like the fascinators. And then it wasn't cool anymore because it had already been done. Now, there is another part of our society and our economy that works quite differently from this. And this is, good examples include medicine, agriculture, engineering, many other fields. And in these fields, change also happens, but it happens in a totally different way. In these fields, change in fundamental procedures. I mean, there's fashions in medicine, of course. Things come in and go out in parts of medicine, but there are laws and procedures and expectations in the entire field that before, for example, you introduce a new medication, that medication has to have been tried out and found to be safe and effective for animals, and then it has to be tried out on a small scale, and it has to be ultimately evaluated in a large-scale randomized experiment. And somebody who prescribed medications that had not been through that approval process could be in jail. There are very strict requirements for this kind of research in medicine that are very, very much respected. And it's not a case of, the top down, the government says you have to do this. I think every physician deeply believes that this is right because they understand that they're responsible for the lives of people, and that the prescriptions that they make need to be based on the best evidence possible. And so a lot of people, when I give medicine as an example, they say, well, but doctors have been to a lot of school and they're very smart, and that's not the same as in education. All right, fine, let's talk about agriculture, where I have every respect for farmers. They're all outstanding in their fields. That's a little joke. Okay. But they're not researchers, but they are businessmen and businesswomen. And their survival in their business, which is running a large or small farm, depends on making good decisions. And so while they don't have to be researchers, they do have to be canny about what works and what does not work. And so the U.S. Department of Agriculture has outreach and provides information about things that work and things that don't work. And a wise farmer is paying very close attention to that and using it to make decisions. They're not told that they can't do this or they must do that, but they're given information where they'd be idiots to not pay attention. As a consequence, just one favorite thing from the internet, therefore it must be correct, dairy cows in America today produce 5 times the amount of milk that they did in 1950. Why is that? Well, that's a result of a vast amount of research that took place into breeds, veterinary practices, feed, management, any number of things where each one of them was evaluated in careful research, and then that research was translated into a form where farmers could easily access it and understand it, and then they could make decisions that would enable them to produce milk far more cost effectively than they could before. So they didn't have to become become experts in research. All of the research was inside the cow. The cow itself and all of the veterinary procedures and other kinds of things contain the findings of the research. And the farmer has to then make choices, between things that have been proven to be effective, but, based on, is this costly? Is it right for my region? Is it something I can pull off? Things of that kind. What happens in fields like this is not only that then people get to use the best things that are known to work, but also that there is a dynamic of progressive improvement. Things get better at a blazing rate because there is a demand for that information. Years ago, my father had to have a heart valve replaced, and his doctor told him, your heart valve, you're not going to die from this in the next year or two. Let's keep close watch on this, but I think you should keep your current heart valve as long as you can, because research is advancing so fast on heart valves that the point you need it, we will have much better heart valves than the ones that are available today. So telling a first grader, don't learn to read now, there are going to be much better reading methods within a few years. Okay, that's a little far out, but we almost count on the idea that education is going to be pretty much the same as it's always been. And new things like computers will come in, and then they'll be used the way things were done before computers. Computers are not terrifically effective, by the way, in education. But other than that kind of marketing things and political things and fashion things, that a lot of technology turn out to be, there's just not much essential improvement. There's change, but there's not essential improvement that takes place in education over a period of time, and certainly not at the rate that it happens in other fields. This is about to change. One of the elements of change is that Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, has now defined in law. This is part of ESSA is the federal education law, has defined what it takes for a program to have strong, moderate, or promising levels of evidence. And I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. Those definitions then matter for certain circumstances. So if for schools that are in the lowest performance band in each of their states, the schools that typically have been very, very low achieving for many, many years, if they can get serious federal grants through Title I to improve themselves, but they can only get them under ESSA if they choose programs that have strong, moderate, or promising levels of evidence. That has never happened before. That is remarkable that such a thing would ever exist. And it puts an importance to evidence that has never existed before. In other areas, other than the school improvement funds, There are situations in federal law that require that schools, in order to get certain kinds of funding, use programs that have strong evidence of effectiveness. And interestingly, this has caused, as it was intended to, it's caused a lot of states to learn a lot more about evidence and take it a lot more seriously. And many states are beginning to require that in order to get certain kinds of state funding, you also need to show evidence of effectiveness for your programs. And that's, that really is quite extraordinary. A lot of this has been moved forward by the fact that there are way more programs than ever existed before, proven programs that people have to choose from. When people were talking about this in the early 2000s, the first response that everybody had was, well, there aren't enough programs to choose among. We can't use an evidence-based policy if saying we believe in evidence means we have to choose only among one or two programs in each area. Well, that's no longer true. The federal government in particular has invested heavily in development and evaluation of replicable programs that are capable of making a big difference in student achievement. I will say, in all of these investments, most of the things that are evaluated fail. But the things that are evaluated that succeed are extraordinary because they've typically been evaluated in large-scale, randomized, very high-quality experiments, and you can really have a lot of faith in making decisions about what you're going to use. So there's a program called Investing in Innovation that is now called Education, Innovation, and Research in the U.S. Department of Education that's putting millions and millions of dollars into development and evaluation of programs that could become game changers in each of many sub-areas of education. The IES, the Institute of Education Sciences, has similar kinds of programs that also have tiers. In both cases, they give more money for programs that have already proven some success, somewhat less for things that have shown limited success. And if you just have a good idea and want to try it out on a small scale, you can do that. And most of the grants are for such studies, but it's not nearly as much money as the higher tiers. And so that same thing occurs in both. In England, there's a program called the Education Endowment Foundation. It's very similar to I3. It's also funding large-scale randomized evaluations, always third-party evaluations of programs that could make a difference across all of England. So these are just the ESSA standards. As I was saying, strong means that you have at least one randomized study with positive effects, and there are other requirements that go in there. Moderate is at least one quasi-experiment, promising at least one correlational study. These must essentially be large-scale with legitimate measures and almost always third-party evaluations. So these are these are high standards. This is a high bar in each case, especially the first two of them, a very high bar in terms of what's considered to be strong or moderate. And I already mentioned that programs that if you meet those standards, there are lots of federal education dollars that a school or district can become eligible for, where they are not eligible if they're adopting things that don't meet those standards. One thing that has sprung up as part of this movement is a series of reviews of research that make it easy for principals, for superintendents, for teachers, for school boards, parents, anyone, to find out what is the evidence base for various programs. Those kinds of folks, practical educators, are not going to want to go sit in the library and read all of our wonderful award-winning published experiments. They're just not. But they will use information if it's well presented to them and easy for them to interpret. In 2002, the government itself created something called the What Works Clearinghouse that reviews research in all different subjects in elementary, secondary, and also post-secondary, and provides fairly detailed information on those programs. Actually, if you're interested in the What Works Clearinghouse and some different views on that, two of my colleagues are in the next two poster sessions are talking about some difficulties with the What Works Clearinghouse, but that's probably more detail than many of you are interested in. But there's very interesting conversations about the What Works Clearinghouse. But What Works Clearinghouse made it clear from the outset that it was not going to modify itself to align to the ESSA standards. And as a result, our group at Johns Hopkins decided that it was going to make such a facility, and we have, and it's called Evidence for ESSA. The evidence, you can see Evidence for ESSA, you can see why it was made. But the idea was to make it easy for people to find out what evidence supports every program there is. Our goal is to find everything that an educator might possibly consider, so far just in reading and math, but we're going to get to a lot of other subjects, and to tell people, is there any evidence at all? If there is there any positive evidence? And if there is positive evidence, what's the nature of it? What's the cost of the program? For whom has it been used? And other kinds of information that would be relevant to practitioners. Now, I wanted to give you an example of how this all could work on a very important issue of practice and policy. I'm sure most of you are aware of response to intervention, RTI. This is a policy going back to the mid-90s that still operates today. The idea is that rather than identifying kids, testing them, and putting them in special education if that seems warranted, RTI has a focus on trying to make sure that kids are given appropriate services all along the way to keep them from needing special education, and also to provide information on how they perform, so that should they have to go to special education, then you have a lot of information about what do they respond to, what's their problem, and so on. So it's not just sitting and taking a test. Now, back when RTI began, the big problem was the concept was very popular, still popular today, but what exactly do people do? What exactly do you do in Tier 1, which is whole class instruction designed to do the best possible to see that all children are successful. Tier 2, which then provides additional instruction for kids who are struggling. And Tier 3, which is more intensive intervention designed as a last-ditch attempt to keep kids from going to special education. Well, that situation has changed dramatically within the last decade. We now have a lot of proven programs for each of those tiers. And if you imagine thinking of RTI from scratch, we can now say, okay, pick a Tier 1 approach from among proven programs. Then pick a Tier 2 approach. Then pick a Tier 3 approach. It doesn't matter, well, I mean, it matters, but you can make your own best decision about which of those which particular approach you choose, but the point is that at each level you're choosing something proven to work. That's what's important here. the kinds of things that we're talking about, we've been doing a lot of reviews of research ourselves, as have many others, to look at questions of what are, for students who are at risk, who are without intervention may very well end up in special education, what are the things that we have that are proven in high quality, usually randomized evaluations to be effective? Things that are in the area of whole class and whole school, which would be tier one to small group tutoring, which is overwhelmingly the most effective strategy for tier 2, and one-to-one tutoring, which is overwhelmingly the most effective strategy for tier 3. And how can you use teachers versus teacher assistants, and a lot of other questions that are susceptible to research. So if you look on our website, and I'll give you the URL at the end here, the evidence for ESSA, you'll find here are whole class and whole school programs that for struggling readers, not just for all students, but specifically for struggling readers, have been found consistently to make a big difference in student achievement. Here are one to small group tutoring models, which would typically be used as tier 2 approaches. Here are one-to-one tutoring models. Now, some of these use paraprofessionals, some of them use teachers, some of them use volunteers. There are differences among them. The size of small groups in the small group tutoring are different. So there's lots to reason to look further than just the fact that you're on this list. But the point is that when educators know that they're looking at a list of things that have all been proven to be effective, that would all meet the ESSA standards, then it gives them a comfort to say, okay, within this list, it's going to be hard to go wrong. Now, for us, we don't have available certified teachers to serve as tutors. What's the best tutoring model that works with paraprofessionals? Or for us, we want, whatever our particular situation may be, there are a variety of things that can be very effective at improving student outcomes. So this is the basic concept here, which I think you start with proven whole class, whole school models, one-to-one, and then one to small group, and then one-to-one. And hopefully, at the end of the process, hardly anybody in the high incidence categories of special education, meaning specific learning disabilities and some others, hardly anybody needs to be in special education. That's the bottom line here. One could use these kinds of approaches, take the money that's now going to special education and instead say, okay, we're going to make sure, we're going to be certain that hardly anybody is going to end up in special education just because they're having reading difficulties or math difficulties. These are problems that can be solved. And they can be solved by the judicious use of evidence. And incidentally, the evidence keeps improving year by year. Just as I was saying in the case of medicine, the number of new programs proven to be effective continues to grow, and we keep getting better and better at being able to apply these. So imagine a situation for the future that's not just limited to RTI and not just limited to reading, but imagine a situation in which teachers and administrators have an opportunity to choose among proven programs and practices. They have an array of programs. I wrote a blog once. I was comparing this to getting a Sears catalog. I once had a job delivering Sears catalogs. It's like, you get a Sears catalog and you're just leafing through, seeing all the wonderful possibilities that there are there. The only difference is, imagine a Sears catalog that's got a Consumer Reports rating for everything that's in the Sears catalog. That's really different. That's the situation that teachers and administrators and superintendents should be in is the opportunity to look at all the wonderful possibilities that they have to solve the problems that they've always had in schools, and be able to make a choice, make an informed, intelligent choice among those. That there would be robust research and development to create, evaluate, and disseminate new programs. One thing I should say, almost all of these large-scale randomized experiments that are validating various programs are multi-method. They're mixed method studies. They include a qualitative element. So it's not just that we're learning yes or no, they work or they don't work. We're learning a lot about how they work and for whom and under what circumstances. And so that whole research enterprise needs to continue and will continue because it's producing information that people genuinely want. It would help remove the divide between research and practice that we've all suffered from for so long, because it creates a situation in which the people at the front end, the people who are working with the kids day in and day out, genuinely want this research because it helps them to do their job better. It's not just something that a bunch of professors at a university somewhere did. It really is something of use to them. That there would be networks of schools implementing the same kinds of programs that would have opportunities to support each other, either in person or online, to help each other with the implementation issues. Nothing implements itself. No program, no matter how well evaluated, is guaranteed to succeed. But if you put implementers together to have opportunities to discuss with each other, to help each other out, to answer each other's questions, then the best people to answer the detailed questions about implementation may be the other people who are using the programs. Providers of the programs are very useful too, of course, and they typically employ people who have used the program and understand it very deeply. And you'd have funding from government focused on proven programs. The ESSA standards have just barely begun this idea, but that is what government money should be able to do, is to jumpstart the use of individual programs that have been proven effective, but also to jumpstart a process of looking to evidence before you look to change practice. Look to the evidence before you begin to give up on your kids and think that there's nothing that can be done for them. Look to the evidence to make wise decisions for your children so that you find ways that you can solve the problems that have existed for so long and seem intractable, but are not intractable if you're looking at things that have been proven to work. In our country, with kids just like the kids that you serve, we can solve these problems.